So you're either a current or soon-to-be software engineer and you're wondering how to be successful in your role. For those of you that are new here, I'm Mike and I'm a software engineer at Amazon. I joined Amazon as a new grad out of college and I've been working as a software engineer for about 2 years now. I was recently promoted from Software Engineer 1 to Software Engineer 2, so I believe that I have the results-based evidence to back up what I'm about to tell you. The purpose of this video is to demystify what goes into making a successful software engineer and to give you the tools you need to be successful in your work. I'm a big believer in giving people actionable advice that they can apply to their own situation, regardless of where they might find themselves. It's my goal to provide you with advice based on my own experiences that will enable and empower you to thrive in your position as a software engineer. Now, I want to preface this video by saying that there's no clear-cut path to success in software engineering because A, we all have our own internal definitions of success, and B, we all have unique obstacles to overcome wherever we might find ourselves. However, I do believe that there's a definitive set of guidelines that should be followed in order to keep yourself on the path to success. I'll begin by listing these guidelines out and then diving deeper into each guideline to provide some context. As I go over each guideline, I'll explain why it's important, provide insight into my own experiences, and then use that insight to illustrate how you can make it actionable in your own situation. With that being said, let's get into it. For guideline number 1, I'll tell you this. You should be an independent problem solver. At tech companies, and really within any type of work environment, people who can figure out and solve problems on their own are heavily sought after. Companies value independence because people who are capable of figuring things out by themselves typically handle pressure well and are capable of coming up with clever solutions to ambiguous problems. And also, people generally like to work with independent coworkers because it means that they won't be constantly getting interrupted by someone that needs help. Now, this isn't to say that you shouldn't be asking questions. Another quality that companies value is curiosity, and if you don't ask the right questions, then you most likely won't give yourself the context that you need to be effective in your work. However, I also believe the saying that there's no such thing as a stupid question is a lie. Software engineers, when faced with a problem, should typically be slow to turn to someone for help, as they should first follow their own in-depth investigative process. After all, a major part about the job as a software engineer is to learn about technology you're unfamiliar with and solve problems that you haven't encountered before. Engineers who fail to perform their own due diligence waste the time of their coworkers and also block the growth of their own ability to solve problems. As an example, I'll tell you about my experience last summer when I was assigned to mentor an intern for 3 months. Throughout the first month of the internship, my manager and I would often talk about my intern's performance. The biggest point of dissatisfaction that my manager had with my intern was that she felt that he was too quick to turn to others for help. Apparently, people within the team were reporting that my intern would frequently seek assistance for problems that should have been easily solvable by a quick Google search or a look into internal documentation. Upon hearing this, I communicated to my intern that this was an area that he was going to have to grow in if he wanted to get a return offer. I also told him that if he really was stuck in any challenge he was facing, then he should make a point to collect everything he had already researched and put it into a written summary that he could provide to whoever he turned to for help. After applying my advice, my intern was able to make a drastic improvement to his performance, and he ended up getting a return offer. And now for you guys, I'll tell you the same process that I told my intern I use when I go about solving a problem at work. First, I make sure that I thoroughly understand the problem. This could be through a deep dive in the code base, an extensive look into documentation, or maybe both. Second, I define success criteria based on my understanding of the problem. Third, I generate ideas that satisfy the success criteria. Usually, there's more than one way to solve a problem, and it's your job as a software engineer to think of all the ways in which the problem could be solved. Fourth, I evaluate my ideas and determine the best path forward. This involves weighing the pros and the cons of each idea and committing to the one that makes the most sense. And 5, I attempt to build the solution and iterate on my attempt until I'm satisfied with it. You can follow these steps yourself, and they should help your problem solving. Now let's get into guideline number 2. Your work must have a measurable impact. This guideline is extremely important from a career growth perspective. I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you're watching this video with the intention of putting yourself in a position where you can grow within your role and eventually increase your responsibilities, job title, and compensation. Well, there are typically 2 ways to do this. The first is where you grow within your company and get promoted, and the second is where you interview and join a company at a higher level than where you were in your current company. Both options are valid ways of going about improving your circumstances, and they depend on what you're looking for and how you want to spend your time. However, neither approach will be possible unless the work in your current role has a measurable, quantifiable impact. Companies evaluate you on a metrics-based system, meaning that they have a set of data points that they use to evaluate a candidate for promotion or hire. If your work can't be measured numerically, then it's difficult for management or recruiters to get an understanding of the impact your work has had based on those data points. For example, if you make a change that reduces the latency of an API within your service, be sure to record the observed decrease percentage in latency after your change. If you deployed a new feature, be sure you have a way to measure how many customers have leveraged that feature. If you make a change that improves the development process for engineers within your team, keep a measure of how much time your change saves your team per sprint. And if it's impossible to measure the impact of your work numerically, then make its qualitative impact explicitly clear. Let me provide some examples from data points that I used in my promotion document. I deployed a change to a CLI tool that decreased latency on our clients' computers by 90%. I wrote a helper tool that saved each developer 2 hours of work per sprint. I designed and led the implementation of an access control mechanism that was used by 100% of the resources within our service. As you can see, each of those data points is measured numerically, so the impact is explicitly clear. I encourage you to follow a similar format as you record accomplishments in your own role. Also, I recommend keeping a personal document that outlines all of your accomplishments in your job. Anytime you accomplish something that you believe has a measurable impact, write it down in that document as soon as you can. And when you write the information down, be sure to use the following format. Begin with the problem statement, which is a breakdown of the problem you are trying to solve. Follow that up with an explanation of how you solved the problem, and then provide numerical data to illustrate the impact that your solution had. I was given this advice very early in my career as a software engineer, and it paid dividends come promotion time. And even if your company doesn't use a document-based promotion system like Amazon, it's still a good idea to have this information on record in case you ever want to make an argument for your promotion or have a reference for your work when interviewing at other companies. The third guideline I want to talk about is this: communicate consistently with your manager about your path to promotion. I'm a big believer in the idea that stagnation in a role is something that should be avoided. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to this because you can go so high up in a role where there isn't really that much room for growth anymore. But for those of you that are early in your career, I believe that promotion is absolutely something that you should be working towards. And I can't emphasize enough that if you want a promotion, you need to communicate your intentions to your manager as early as possible. When I started full-time at Amazon, one of the first questions I asked my manager is what an expected promotion timeline looks like for an entry-level software engineer and what I can do to expedite my promotion process. My manager communicated to me that the average promotion timeline for someone with Amazon at my level is usually around 2 years in the role, with high performers being promoted in 1.5 years. Upon hearing this, I thought on it and eventually made it clear to my manager that I would make it my goal to achieve a promotion in 1.5 years. Now, the expedited promotion was something that I wanted and something that I believed that I could achieve, but it definitely doesn't have to apply to everyone watching this video. I would say that the most important first step is to make sure that you establish a clear promotion timeline with your manager, so you're both aligned on a deadline that you should be working towards. After I had aligned on the target promotion deadline with my manager, we periodically met to ensure that I was on track to meet the deadline. Relating to the data points that I was discussing in Guideline 2, my manager and I would review each data point that was required for promotion, and if we felt that I was missing something related to a particular data point, we would make a plan to scope in some work that would satisfy it. If I'm being honest, these types of proactive measures are something that your manager should be doing on their own, but if for some reason this isn't happening, then it's up to you to take the initiative and start the conversation yourself. Even in my own case, there were times where I grew concerned that things might be moving too slowly, and I would always raise those concerns to my manager. Now, I will be honest, I was very fortunate in the fact that I had a manager who genuinely had my best interests at heart. She was consistently willing to make time to prioritize my growth as an engineer, and I benefited heavily from that. While managers like this aren't uncommon, if you aren't lucky enough to have one, you need to take the time to find somebody within the company who is willing to support your path to promotion. And you need to speak to them with the aim of figuring out how you can improve your circumstances. Now for the fourth guideline. Code and documentation quality matter. I'm going to be completely honest with you. If the work that you produce is consistently of a low quality, you're not going to be promoted. Like I was mentioning earlier in the video, tech companies like Amazon evaluate on a metrics-based system. In the specific case of Amazon, one of the metrics that's used to evaluate your performance is the average number of revisions you have per CR. For reference, CR stands for code review, and a code review at Amazon is synonymous to a pull request in Git. In a pull request, your changes will be reviewed before they can be merged into the main repo. If the reviewers find problems with your changes, they will comment on your pull request, and then you'll update your original changes to respond to those comments. In a CR, the process of responding to these comments and putting the revised code out for review is called a revision. Within Amazon, the general consensus is that engineers should strive to keep their revision count per CR as low as possible, as it's an indicator that they typically write high-quality code. Personally, I don't agree with the usage of this metric for evaluation very much, as people will often merge commits and then write a follow-up CR to fix those problems. So now they have 2 CRs with 1 revision instead of 1 CR with 2 revisions, and they've gamed the system to decrease their average revision count. But my opinion on this doesn't change the fact that this metric is evaluated, and in general, people who tend to write lower quality code do have higher revision counts on average. And a similar principle applies for the process of writing documentation within these types of companies. At Amazon, the roadmap for a new feature typically involves an engineer owning the design for that feature. This engineer will write a document that outlines the problem statement, a high-level overview of the proposed solution, and the low-level implementation details and task planning. Before any development occurs for the feature, the document will be collectively reviewed by the team, and if the design is approved, then the team will move into the implementation phase. However, if the team finds that the design is missing critical details that will result in blockers, then they'll provide feedback to the author and ask them to update their design. If the gaps in the design document are big enough, this will result in a follow-up meeting being scheduled to review the new changes. And typically, this is something that you want to avoid, as it results in delays to the project roadmap and can potentially block related work streams. If you exhibit this pattern when writing your own documentation, it will reflect poorly on you as an engineer and likely delay your growth within the company. In terms of what actions you can take to ensure that you produce work of a high quality, I'll tell you this. Anytime you're about to write code, look into prior commits from other engineers within the repo. Look for patterns that you can follow in the code that you find, and try to apply those patterns within your own code. Additionally, make sure you're following general best practices when writing code. At a minimum, you should try to ensure that you're developing with readability, simplicity, and scalability in mind. For a deeper reference into some general best practices that you can follow when writing code, I've included a link in the description. And you should follow a similar process when writing documentation. There's almost certainly going to be documents that have been written by more senior engineers on the team, so you should make a point to seek them out as a reference for your own writing process. If you have a question on a best practice related to something team specific, I recommend reaching out to an engineer within your team. It's much better to have all the context you need when making a change than it is to throw something up on a prayer and hope that it's accepted by your coworkers. And now for my last guideline, guideline number 5, you should be an asset to your teammates. Some people think that all it takes as a software engineer is to do the task that you've been assigned. And to an extent, this is true. If you perform your own tasks in a satisfactory manner, you'll probably be fine in your current role. But the engineers that truly stand out, they figure out how to make themselves useful outside of their own scope. Typically, teams work on a common project, and while each engineer on the team has their own task which involve a unique set of success criteria, there are usually common workflows or pieces of infrastructure that are going to be used within each task. Good engineers will find opportunities for improvement within these commonalities and implement the improvement on behalf of the team. These types of actions will typically improve the team's development velocity as well as the developer experience as a whole. As an engineer with a growth mindset, it's up to you to look for these types of opportunities and take the initiative to improve things on behalf of your team. Your team will be very appreciative, and it's this type of stuff that they'll remember when it's time for you to get promoted. As an example, let me tell you about an improvement I made during my first project at Amazon. We were writing code that interacted with the BIOS of Windows laptops. For some background information, BIOS stands for Basic Input-Output System, and it's used to start the computer system after it's turned on. Specifically, our code set a password that locked the BIOS, and this had to happen before other code that we wrote could be executed on the computer. So when engineers were testing the entire workflow in our codebase on a laptop, they would first have to unlock their computer's BIOS, which was locked from a previous test run, and then execute the workflow. Originally, they were resetting the BIOS password manually, and the process of resetting the password would usually take between 5 and 10 minutes. And this is because it involved booting up the computer, entering the BIOS setup menu, and then manually entering the password. I quickly found this process to become extremely frustrating, so in order to improve the developer experience, I created PowerShell scripts that programmatically retrieved a developer's password and used it to unlock the BIOS. This eliminated the need to restart the computer and saved each developer a few minutes whenever they wanted to execute a test workflow. The team was really grateful for the initiative that I took, and those scripts were actually referenced in my promotion document. Similar to what I did, ask yourself the following questions to determine if there are any areas for process improvement within your own team. Are there any recurring pain points that you or your coworkers experience while developing? If so, how can you solve them? How can you reduce the work that's required to maintain a service? This might involve something like simplifying the onboarding process for new customers or reducing the incoming ticket count for that service. How can documentation be improved so that new developers can ramp up more quickly? If you ask yourself these types of questions, you should almost certainly be able to find an area where you can positively impact your team. And that about does it. If you follow the advice in this video, you should be well on your way to success in your role as a software engineer. Obviously, there are nuances to every position that can't be covered in one video, but the content we've covered should serve as an effective reference for you as you go about your journey. If you found this video useful, a like would be much appreciated, and be sure to consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.